submarine service and served on diesel submarines, then switched to naval intelligence and focused on the overt collection of human intelligence and all-source analysis. As an intelligence officer, he was trained by the Defense Intelligence Agency and the CIA, and earned a master's degree in Russian area studies at Georgetown. He also graduated from the U.S. Army War College. He worked on or was involved in more than 50 countries around the world, including 3 tours in Vietnam, assistant naval attaché at the U.S. Embassy in Moscow in the 1970s, and leading Navy and Marine Corps intelligence operations during Desert Storm, Desert Shield. He also led Marine and Navy intelligence operations from offices in Munich and Berlin and the Persian Gulf. Since retiring from the Navy in 1991, Dick's international activities have included projects in Russia with the Ministry of Defense, the Russian Orthodox Church, and the business community, observing elections in Russia and other former communist countries, and escorting 4 Russian delegations each through a month of training in northern Colorado. That's a curious one. He serves on an all-volunteer board of officers for the Honor Flight Northern Colorado program. This involves taking war veterans to Washington, D.C. for a couple of days to view the war memorials there. He's a recognized lecturer and consultant on foreign affairs and national security issues. Dick and his wife Sandra reside in Estes Park, and all 5 of their adult children and 10 grandchildren live here in Colorado. So we've invited Dick tonight to share some of the highlights of his career and wisdom. And a lot of it, I think, is particularly relevant in view of the world situation today. So Dick, I'll turn it over to you for the next 20 minutes or so, and we'll have time for questions after that.
Yes, sir. I'm setting my
Oh,
stopwatch. Okay. My sister and all the folks around the table here know why I have to have a stopwatch.
that's right, I said 20 minutes.
But you didn't bring slides.
Yeah, no slides. Oh, okay. Can't do that in 25 minutes. How do you start that? There it goes. Okay, thanks. Okay. Well, join the Navy and see the world. I started hearing that shortly after World War II when I was 5 years old when the war ended. So Sea Cadets and active duty reservists, I hope that some of the lessons that I learned may be of interest to you all who are still in and getting ready to Sea Cadets. Okay, my early life. I was born in 1940. My dad was a pilot. Our dad, that's my sister, as I told you. Our dad was a pilot in the mid-1930s. He was a barnstormer performing in air shows. Our mother was a secretary for the city of Parkersburg, West Virginia. And in World War II, Pappy was an Army Air Corps pilot who flew cargo from India to China over the hump, the Himalaya Mountains. And after 89 missions, he returned to the United States. 9 months later, I had a brother. Also, in World War II, 4 uncles, 1 Army Horse Cavalry, yes, like in John Wayne Western movies, 2 Navy, and 1 Merchant Marine. An aunt was a career Navy and ended as a Chief Petty Officer. When I was 7 or 8, Pappy took me to a movie filmed at West Point, starring Doc Blanchard and Glenn Davis as themselves. Both were football Heisman Trophy winners, and I immediately decided to attend a military academy. Aunt Margaret convinced me that Annapolis is the best. I proudly wore the Navy uniform for 33 years. My keys to success were, number one, my wife Sandra. She supported me 100%. She loves to travel. She loves to live in different places in the United States and abroad. As a family, we lived in the Philippines, the Soviet Union, and West Germany. I lived a year in Saigon, Vietnam. Number two, I volunteered. I volunteered, gang, for assignments, and Sandra approved, accepting that she would be raising our 6 children by herself when I was on 6-month deployments or on short TDYs. Number three, our career included many firsts for shipmates and me. Some were the first time in Navy history. I'll explain in my remarks. Now, to save time for your questions, I must address only important events. Academy. Our class entered in 1958. 15,000 guys applied. 1,250 of us were accepted, and only 800 graduated. Everyone had to major in engineering, and we carried 26 credit hours every semester for 4 years in engineering and Navy stuff. Okay, summer 1959, before our sophomore year, our class and many university ROTC midshipmen served 2 months on destroyers, learning to perform enlisted duties, from washing dishes, cleaning bilges and heads, in the engine rooms, scraping and painting, swabbing decks, etc. And you all know what that's all about, right? Okay. We also stood watch as helmsmen, lookouts, loading supplies in port and underway replenishment. Plus, we participated in fire and damage control drills, etc. That summer, the St. Lawrence Seaway and Welland Canal around Niagara Falls, between the U.S. and Canada, was opened. The first time in history that ships could enter and exit between the Atlantic Ocean and the Great Lakes. One of our Navy League members, my classmate Joe Procopio, many of you know Joe. He's not well and was not able to come tonight, but he and I were assigned to the destroyer Forrest Sherman. It was the flagship for this historical cruise. In Canada, we were moored astern Her Majesty's ship Britannica, Queen Elizabeth's ocean-going yacht. She and President Eisenhower dedicated the new entrance into the Great Lakes. Some 25 destroyers followed us in pairs and visited ports in the United States and Canada. Recruiting was the objective. First time in history we ever had us up there, right? Okay. Our ship and one other were the only ones who sailed on Lake Michigan and Lake Superior. The first time in Navy history on all 5 lakes. In each port we visited, the city hosted a formal dance for us midshipmen and their college freshman and sophomore girls. Sandra and I met in Duluth, Minnesota, and we married 2 days after I graduated from the academy. Joe Procopio was in our wedding party. She was what you carried flowers.
Flower girl.
What did we call you?
Flower girl.
Flower girl, yeah, okay. Okay. At the academy, I told you that I did a lot of volunteering. I volunteered as one of 125 midshipmen for President Kennedy's inaugural ball in the large armory in Washington, D.C. West Point, the Air Force Academy, and the Coast Guard Academy each had 125 ushers. That's what we did. And And as sophomores, we attended the first, are you ready for this? The first Air Force Navy game. The Zoomies were highly favored to win. Score, Navy 33, Air Force 3. Yeah, all right. Hoorah! Okay, everybody, hoorah! Hoorah! Okay, our Joe Bellino was the Heisman Trophy winner that year. Okay, Sandra attended her freshman year at the Georgetown University Girls School, located in Washington, D.C., only 55 miles from Annapolis. It was my senior year. President Kennedy's vice president was Lyndon Johnson. A classmate was dating his daughter, Linda Bird, and Sandra and I double dated with them one Saturday, touring Washington. Linda Bird was driving her fancy convertible as the daughter of the vice president of the United States, right? Yes, the Secret Service discreetly followed us everywhere. That's where I learned to evade the KGB when I was okay. I chose the LST, Landing Ship Tank, for my first ship. It had only 12 officers instead of destroyers with some 25 officers. And where some of our guys never got to become an officer of the deck. Well, okay. After we graduated and our 30-day leave and honeymoon, I reported to my ship. It was on a 6-month Mediterranean deployment. So I arrived on board in Nice, France. Let's see, okay. Naturally, I started as a junior officer of the deck, and within a month, qualified as an officer of the deck. That was one of my major goals. We arrived in Little Creek Naval Base outside of Norfolk the day before the Cuban Missile Crisis began. Sandra met me on the pier, and we headed for Philadelphia Naval Shipyard, where we spent 4 months in firefighting, damage control, and nuclear, biological, chemical warfare defense school. The day after we arrived from 6 months in the Med, and Sandra and I were headed north, the ship got underway with many Atlantic Fleet ships en route to Cuba, Cuban Missile Crisis. Meanwhile, Sandra and I conceived our first child, a boy who is now 59 and a captain on the Estes Park Police Force. The invitations we got, and here on the picture of me as a lieutenant commander standing with a young fellow, that was in Red Square. Behind us is Lenin's tomb, and up on the tomb is Leonid Brezhnev and the entire Politburo, all the senior communists trying to control the world. Okay, so let's see, where am I now? So I missed this Cuban Missile Crisis, but I sure had fun in Philadelphia for 4 months. Okay, a second honeymoon kind of thing. Okay, now upon return to Little Creek, I became the damage control assistant under the engineering officer. I was division officer for ship fitters and electricians. Okay, I then, after about 18 months on the LST, I volunteered for submarine school. 6 months there. My first submarine was in Key West, Florida, and all 3 of my submarines were diesels. I was in the bottom 100 of my class at the academy, and only the top 200 went into nukes. Okay, so all you nukes, okay, I never made it to your level. Okay, okay. So anyway, what did I say? Yeah, diesels. All right. Now I'm going to give you some highlights of some of my assignments. the first boat out of Key West, med deployment for 6 months, New Orleans as the Navy rep for Mardi Gras. 2 dives in the Mississippi, and I believe that that was the first time in naval history that a submarine ever made a dive in the Mississippi River. That I could be wrong on that, but we did 2. One practicing to get up to New Orleans, and then there were thousands of people on both sides of the Mississippi River to watch us make that dive. It's 105 feet deep up there, by the way. We only went down to a keel depth of 5 feet, so, okay. Out of Key West, we rescued Cuban refugees and picked up 2 bodies. Let's see, I was then promoted to lieutenant, and then I got qualified for my Dolphins. Then I volunteered for Vietnam on USS Perch, home ported in Subic Bay in the Philippines. Many of you who've ever sailed the Pacific probably have been to Subic Bay. And what we did was, it was a true transport submarine, APSS. So we carried UDT, underwater demolition folks, to South Vietnam, collecting intelligence on Viet Cong-held villages. And at night, we would run aground. Not supposed to do that with ships, but that's what we got paid to do. The ship had been specially configured. Let's see. We would be at 5 feet, that much of the periscope out of the water, and the frogs would, 3 at a time with their weapons and all that stuff, they would swim out of the forward escape hatch. And then they would get in boats, 2 rubber boats, and they would go ashore and start collecting intelligence. We were the Perch was the only submarine with World War II deck guns. In the United States Navy, at that time, we were the last to have the deck guns that they used in World War II. Okay? So, let's see. On one mission, we fired on a Viet Cong village, because the Viet Cong were getting organized to come up and attack an ARVN, Army of South Vietnam, a unit of 75 guys and 2 American Army advisors, and they asked if we could maybe disperse the VC. So I was the gunner, I was the weapons officer. So I'm up there. We had no fire control system, so my 2 eyeballs were where we needed to look to see where we were going to shoot. Anyway, so I told the captain, okay, I want to start up here, sir, and about every 3 degrees, work down, but the church is over here, and I don't want to hit the church. He said, go for it. We did, and the VC did not come down on that beach. The next morning, we picked up those 75 ARVN troops and our 2 Army Marines, 2 Army advisors, plus, and we brought them out to the boat, and and we rescued 2 Vietnamese families who had been collaborating with the ARVN, okay, and when the Vietnamese CO came out, come to the boat, I was not only a gunnery officer, but I was also the first lieutenant, responsible for everything when the submarine was on the surface. And he came up to me and said, please bring those families. We did. 4 adults, and I think there were 6 children, and 1 was just a babe in arms. So, of course, we kept everybody up on the deck, and we stayed on the surface, because the ARVN carried hand grenades around, you know, all hanging off of them. Anyway, so the bottom line was that we then took them out and turned them over to the South Vietnamese Navy. All right, let's see. So, oh, by the way, that was the first time, the only time between World War II and the first Gulf War that an American submarine took an enemy under fire. Okay, so a little bit of history there too. All right. We also, okay, perch. Okay. Well then, 2 months later, back in Subic Bay, we were replaced by the Tunny. She had a hangar for launching 2 Regulus missiles with nuclear warheads against any enemies like the Soviets or, well, the Chinese weren't that bad at that time. Anyway, so we took, that hangar was converted to, for larger numbers of troops that we could carry. Let's see, we had a total swap of crews, except the except the commanding officer. Half of our crew were Filipinos. Think about that, you know. I mean, they were all, every rate we had on the boat, etc. And we had the steward for the wardroom was actually a chief. Okay, but they all got to spend 2 or 3 years back in their home country. Okay, Sandra arrived with our 3-year-old son, picture that you've seen in Moscow, and our 3-month-old daughter. The Filipina maid, fascinating stories about her. So in the Q&A, that might be one. I like to, seed audiences for these things. Okay, I was the engineering officer in the Tunny, and I was the engineer for these running aground. Was always the diving officer, which so I made. Let's see, how was it? How many did I? We ran aground 37 times when I was the engineer, and then we would back off after we recovered the frogs. We would back off submerged for about 400 yards every time. Bring them on board, dive, and feed them a steak dinner at 4 o'clock in the morning. Okay. You all know that submarines are not designed to back up underway, right? Let's see. Oh, yeah. Well, so by this time, I realized that I couldn't go nuke, so I wrote a letter of resignation. Captain learned about it, and so he came up one night. We were going back to Subic Bay for Vietnam, and he said, "You're awfully quiet, Life." Dick, okay, because I was still a lieutenant, and he was a commander. So, but anyway, what's going on? I said, "Hey, 75% of my time I'm spending away from my family, and we have 2 kids already, and we want more." So he said, "Do you ever think about naval intelligence?" And I said, "No, nothing about it." He said, "Well, I have had 2 different assignments in intelligence, and here's what we do." And he said, I got very interested, guys and gals. So he said, "When we get back, after about 3 or 4 days, my wife and I will have you to our home with Sandra so that we can have more discussion." And after that dinner, we went back and said, "Okay," and then we'll try it for 2 years. So we flew back to the States obviously with the 2 kids, and my Pentagon tour as a lieutenant front office for Naval Intelligence. They put me in. The bosses were 2 Naval Academy grads and submariners. And let's see, we then had 2 commanders, 1 Marine Corps lieutenant colonel, 2 civilians, and 3 enlisted. And everybody in that office was focusing on the Soviet Union. And they started grooming me to become a specialist on the Soviet submarine construction and operations. So, next door to us was the Director of Naval Intelligence, a Naval Academy grad, 2-star admiral. Are you ready for this, guys, gals? Lucky Flucky. Okay, this was Admiral Flucky. He was the most highly decorated officer in Navy history. World War II submarine commander. He received 4 Navy crosses, then the Medal of Honor. Okay, so, you know, officers always have to make a 15-minute call on the new boss, so that's what I went in to do. And the Admiral had me sit down, we had some coffee, and he pumped me for details, every detail about perch and tunny and how we did our operations. And so it was just unbelievable. For the next year, twice a week, I did a one-on-one briefing with Lucky Flucky, okay? And I would take in the satellite photos and intercepted communications from the National Security Agency, etc. Okay, it was just the most unbelievable thing that I could ever imagine. All right, he then retired. Okay, I also briefed Secretary of the Navy. I'm a lieutenant. Okay, I testified before a House Armed Service subcommittee over on the Hill. Let's see. Then I got called back to where we had to go through guarded doors because of the classifications that were being held back there. And they called me in, and a captain, another Naval Academy submariner, and he said, "Dick, I want you to tell your bosses this. The Soviets just lost a diesel submarine carrying 3 ballistic missiles with nuclear warheads and the torpedoes with nuclear warheads. They don't know where it went down. It's about 300 miles northwest of Hawaii, and they don't know they even have lost it." Okay? So he said, "Never in the rest of your life say anything about that." Me? Say something? No. But anyway, so
That was 50 years
I signed a
ago.
paper to that effect. And then a couple of days later, I went up and I whispered in the ear of my 2 captains, and so now the 3 of us were the only ones to know this exceptionally sensitive information. And then a couple of days later, I was called back to the other, back behind the doors, and they said, "Dick, something's going to be done, so I signed this paper." And it started with the Secretary of the Navy, the Chief of Naval Operations, and some admirals, etc., and Lieutenant Life, the very bottom of the list. And we all had to sign that. You don't say anything about it. I can tell you about it now because if you read Blind Man's Bluff, okay, anybody in the room here read Blind Man's Bluff? Okay, I knew you did, JJ, okay, all right. That's all described in Blind Man's Bluff, the details. okay? So that's totally unclassified. And anyway, so read it and you'll find out